Philadelphia is steep in broadcast history. From the early pioneering days of broadcasting in the 1920s to today, Philadelphia has always been at the forefront. The Delaware Valley has been home to some of the best local programming in the country, starting with the early soap operas and children's shows to pioneering the best news formats in the country. Much of it all began right here. From radio announcers to television personalities, cameramen to directors, these were the broadcasters that burned out the airwaves. These were the pioneers of Philadelphia broadcasting.
This is Michael Archer, longtime journalist in the Philadelphia area, kind of a legend, an inside guy, one of those people that does all the work and gets very little credit for it. Michael, tell us why you got into journalism in the beginning.
Well, Bill, I grew up in the business. My father was in the news business. He started out at the Journal American newspaper, eventually went on to work at ABC News, and was one of the people that helped start ABC News' news gathering operation. So I grew up with that as a kid in the 60s, and I was always fascinated by it. And that's really what got me started. I never really thought about doing anything else. And I went to college, majored in journalism, got my first job. Actually, my first job was a summer job at WABC Radio when I was 16. And the following summers, I worked at WABC TV, which was at the height of eyewitness news at the time. I got out of school, got a job at WXYZ TV in Detroit, the ABC station there. Ended up producing weekends, was there for about a year, and then came back to New York, WABC, and was there for about 5 years. That's where I met Larry Kane. And when Larry returned to Philadelphia, I came back with him.
You mean to tell me you owe part of your career to Larry Kane?
Yes, I do. I'm in Philadelphia because of Larry Kane.
All right, so you came to Philadelphia, and you were always an inside guy.
Yes.
Were you always happy doing that, or did you always want to be on the street like most inside guys?
No, I can't say that. When I worked at a small radio station when I really first got out of college, but I can't say that I had this great desire to be an anchor or be a street reporter. I always felt my strength was being the guy who's organizing things, and I always felt that was the big challenge of directing people, organizing, how are we going to do it, what's the best way to do it, who's the best person to do it. So I always thought that was my strength, and I just loved being in the newsroom. I mean, the newsroom was like, I used to think other people went to work and went to offices, and they sat in their office all day, and I thought to myself, that's not terribly exciting. Whereas the newsroom, even if you had an office off the newsroom, there was always that excitement right outside the door. And when something happened, all the energy that was generated in the newsroom to get things done. So I always felt that's where I wanted to be.
Basically, you started out in Philadelphia at Channel 10. How long did you stay at Channel 10?
I was at Channel 10 a little over 11 years.
And
which is a long time.
You were an executive producer.
I came as assistant news director, and then we put the two jobs together, and I was assistant news director, executive producer, both for a while. Then we established a managing editor position. But my main responsibility was, overseeing the newsroom and the shows. And I was here for a long time, 11 years, as you know, and we're kind of dinosaurs in that we stayed at the same place for a long time.
Speak for yourself.
You were more of a dinosaur than I was. You were at Channel 10 for decades.
Yes, 1,000 years.
But I was there for 11 years, which is a long time. And then from there, I went to, my family stayed here, and I went to work in New York at Court TV. Steve Cohen and I, the former general manager at Channel 10, were among a team of folks that started Court TV in 1991, and I was there for over 5 years. Then I went to work for WOR TV in New York as head of their investigative unit for a few years. And then I came back to Philadelphia. Again, my family was here. I was commuting in 2001, about 6 or 7 months before 9/11.
So then you went to KYW. How long were you at KYW?
I was there until a year ago. I retired. I was there for 14 years.
Wow, so you're 14 at KY, 11
Yeah.
Channel 10.
Yeah.
What'd you like the most?
They both were very exciting. We lived through, when I was at Channel 3, of course, we lived through 9/11. And I just started when I was at Channel 10 in the mid-'80s, when you and Harvey and Dennis Waltering and Chris Long and John Blunt, which I think came to probably the pinnacle was during our MOVE coverage. I think that period of time was probably the best local TV news operation in the country.
Back then we had a certain set of rules. Today they have another set of rules.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Well, as I was just talking to somebody outside, for instance, at Channel 3, the entire staff has pretty much turned over in the last year since I left. There was a management change. Some of the more experienced reporters moved on or retired. And I think one of the downsides of all the movement in local television news is you lose a sense of history. Who knows who everybody is? And if you have a room full of people who are not familiar with the area, who's the person they're going to that knows what's the significance of X event? Mm-hmm. There's no institutional memory, which I think is critical, which is what I think we had at Channel 10 during the time in the 80s, because there was a lot of folks who were from Philadelphia or had been in Philadelphia for a long time, and I think that gave us a great advantage.
What did you enjoy the most when you were working in journalism? Was it the organization? Was it the making decisions on the fly? What was it?
I think it was the making decisions on the fly and reacting to the big story. I think that's what got my energy going more than anything.
What were the biggest stories you worked on?
Well, I think the biggest local news story that I worked on in my career was MOVE, without question. I think obviously the biggest story was certainly 9/11. But locally, there was no bigger story than MOVE. And I often think about really how little attention MOVE got nationally and internationally. And I often think that if that, first of all, I don't think it would have happened today, but had it happened today, I think it would have been a much, much bigger deal. And I think if that had happened in New York or Chicago, it would have been a much bigger deal.
When you look back at, say, MOVE, you made a lot of decisions. Would you change any of them? Or is there something you said, geez, I wish I did this?
I think when it comes to MOVE, I think we pretty much made all the right decisions. I can't look back and think there's something that we didn't do that we should have done. When I do look back, I think we were pretty smart. And considering the magnitude of the story, that we were in the right place at the right time with the right people. And I'm very proud of what we did. And that was the most stressful day for all of us. But I think we did a great service to the city. And what was most distressing about it is how terribly mishandled it was by the city. I think about what's happened in the last few years with race relations, police, community relations. And when you think back to that time, Wilson Goode, the first black mayor elected in Philadelphia, just 4 years after 8 years of Frank Rizzo, which was a cultural shift. And I can remember Wilson Goode, the night he was elected, jumping up on the stage and raising his arms and talking about what a great future it was going to be. And less than a year and a half later, MOVE happened.
Yeah, and he was right in the middle.
And he was right in the middle, and just the architect of a tremendous failure.
Yeah, yeah. If there's one thing that I remember distinctly is him saying that he really didn't know what was going on because his TV was blurry. Do you remember that?
Yes. The more you think about it, and you think about how they handled it, how it was all unfolded in the MOVE hearings after the MOVE incident, you just could. It was hard to believe what you were hearing, and how these guys could so mishandle and misread a situation. And here you had an African-American mayor and an African-American managing editor. Managing director.
Yeah.
And they let the thing just get completely out of control. And in the months, as you know, the months leading up to it, nobody either knew how to or wanted to deal with it. And they let it fester and fester, going back to 1978, the first MOVE incident where a police officer was killed. Nobody would touch it. And what happens when you ignore a problem, it gets worse.
Yeah. Well, you got into journalism probably because of your father, as you said.
Yeah.
And you have some children of your own.
Yes.
None of them went into journalism.
Were
you a little disappointed about that?
No. They both majored in communications in college, although I think they did that because they couldn't think of anything else to major in. And neither one went into the business. One guy started out teaching and was a principal for a while here in Philadelphia, since changed careers and is now in the financial industry. And the other guy is a football coach in Texas. And I'm very happy with what they did. I would have been thrilled if they went into the business, but they're very happy in what they're doing, and they maybe have a little less stress than they might have.
Let's talk about journalism in general. Journalism when you first started as opposed to journalism today. What's the difference?
Well, when I first started, first of all, it was dominated by men, number one. So I probably among the biggest changes is there's probably more than 50% female in television news business now, and of course there's a lot more minorities, and which is obviously a good thing because you are now getting a broad spectrum of what communities really look like. So that's probably the biggest change. And not to sound like an old timer, but I think a lot of people in our generation that went into to do the news and to do serious news and important news, and which characterizes hard news. And I think as years went by, as local television news became a thriving industry. I mean, it used to be news operations didn't make money. And with the advent of eyewitness news and the explosion of local news in the 70s and 80s, I think a lot of people got into the business because, well, this was a glamorous career. I can make a lot of money. I can be on TV. And not to say that they all were not trying to be serious journalists, but I think there was fewer people who were in it because I want to be a reporter, or I want to be a producer, and I want to work on big, important issues.
Do you think the rules of journalism have changed much since you came into the business and today?
Yes.
In what way?
I don't think there's nearly the emphasis on writing that there used to be. I don't think there's nearly the emphasis on developing sources. When I was working, I would turn to the people, when a big story broke, I would turn to people like you and Terry Ruggles and Walt Hunter at Channel 3, because I knew, and Harvey Clark, I knew that you guys knew who to talk to, how to get information, could pick up the phone and talk to the people we need to talk to. And as years went on, there was fewer and fewer people like that, younger people who got into the business, who moved around a lot more, would spend a couple of years here, a couple of years there. And a lot of them really didn't take the time to develop the sources. And I think that was instrumental, for instance, in our coverage of MOVE. I mean, we were all over that story months in advance because we had people who knew who to talk to, how to get information, knew the history of the organization. I think a lot of that is missing now.
Back then, don't you think that there were more rules concerning how journalists went about their jobs, and that a lot of that has changed?
Yes, and I think a lot of that has changed, I think, with the advent of social media, which on the one hand has been a great thing, but you know, one of the phrases that makes me a little crazy is when people use the term citizen journalist. Just because you have a cell phone and you can shoot video of an accident or a fire or whatever the event is, that makes you a witness. It doesn't necessarily make you a journalist. So I think that's watered down the term of what a real journalist is.
If you could change something today in the newsroom, what would you change?
I'd put, as I just speaking, I'd put a greater emphasis on writing, and I'd put a greater emphasis on people learning the area they're covering and developing sources and understanding the community that they're covering.
Television news used to be king. I mean, there was
Yes.
a time when everybody watched the news every night. Now, television news is in trouble.
Big trouble.
Big trouble. Is there any way you think that it can recover?
You know, that's a difficult question because I think, you know, 20 and 30 somethings are not watching TV news. They're just not. And there's no incentive for them to do it. And the people watching TV news, particularly network newscasts, are all 50 plus. The younger generation can get news so many other places, and they can get news tailored to what they want to see and hear. So they don't have a desire or need to go to the 5 o'clock news to see what happened that day. They can find out any moment of the day on any number of devices, their phones, their laptops, their iPads, what's going on, and they can search specifically what they care about. So that's kind of watered down the audience for TV news, particularly local news. I don't know what local TV news is going to look like in 5 years.
I don't even know whether it's going to be around. I have my doubts at times.
I thought there would be more changes already than there have been. As you know, local stations have a big emphasis on their websites, on their apps, which they have to do to maintain an audience and to monetize some of that so that they can keep the money coming in the door. But are they going to be able to sustain that in the next 5 or 10 years? I'm not sure.
Yeah, newspapers have had a great problem too. I mean, I don't know what the future of a newspaper is, especially in Philadelphia.
I think part of the trouble with newspapers is that with the advent of the internet, they put their information out there for free, which was a great thing for the public and for readers. Just go online, I can read it for free. I don't have to go down and buy it. Well, they found out that, you know, trying to make money just by advertising online wasn't enough. And now, again, 20 and 30 somethings, they're not buying newspapers.
I know. I don't know what the answer is either. We're almost out of time, so I want to ask you, tell me one thing that people that really know you from the business don't know about Mike Archer that would surprise us.
Well,
that is a tough question, I know.
They probably don't know that I'm probably a big softie when it comes to my grandchildren. You know, I always felt to run a newsroom, you had to be a tough guy. You were dealing with a lot of personalities, a lot of strong personalities, and one thing you wanted to have in a newsroom is respect. And if they could be your friend and respect you, great. But the most important thing was respect, and I always felt my job was to be the hard nose and to get things done.
But deep down inside, you really wanted to sympathize with that reporter who was giving you trouble that day?
I really wanted to go out and play golf with you, Bill, instead of yelling at you on the telephone.
Did you ever regret your decision to go into journalism?
No, I don't think I ever regretted it. It's a difficult life, though, as you know. It's tough on your family. Long days, nights, weekends, holidays, missing events. So you have to have a strong wife and family that supports it. I mean, my wife put up with a lot of long days and nights and hours of me being away, and you know, when I worked at Court TV, I was coming home on the weekends. I had a small apartment in New York while she was raising 2 teenagers.
That's a good point. I don't think most people understand that there's a lot of sacrifice when you go into this business.
It's a huge amount of sacrifice.
Plus, you have very little security. They don't know about that either, right?
Yes.
Well, Mike, time is up, but I do want to say this. I did work with you for 11 years, and I really respected you. If that was important to you, you won. You had my respect. And I think you did a great job, and I think Philadelphia is better off because you were here.
Thanks.
So thank you very much. I wish you luck with your retirement, and I hope you continue to play golf. And remember, never pick up if you can help it.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate it.